Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Shakespeareance, the first Shakespeareance of 2022, and only the fourth Shakespearean since I started beginning these back in the summer of 2021. The fall of 2021 got a lot more hectic than I thought it was going to get. I had a guest who I was really looking forward to fall through in September, and then I went away for 2 weeks, and then I started teaching. I got off my rhythm, and then things got crazy. And so that's a little bit of what we're going to talk about today with my very good friend and very special guest, Mya Gosling, the creator of GoodTickleBrain, and there she is. Cue applause. Yay. Oh, and somebody applauded in the chat. Well done. Well done. Mya, we've had this conversation off and on a lot in the last 18 months. It's so great to see you. Let me, now that you have turned your camera on, let me mortify you just a little bit with praise that it's always a delight. Yes, hide yourself. It's always a delight to see your cartoons. You are the creator. GoodTickleBrain is the foremost, if not the only, Shakespearean web comic on the internet, and it is. And honestly, I think you might be the new gateway drug for a lot of kids because your cartoons get used. Gateway drug to Shakespeare, I should clarify, because your cartoons get used by teachers a lot. I mean, they're very fun. They're very deep and rich. You have, as you describe her, a pocket dramaturg on hand all the time. Can you talk about a little bit about how GoodTickleBrain got started and how your passion for Shakespeare began? Do I understand that we have your parents to blame?
Yes. I mean, I think, most people can blame their parents for a lot of things. And I happen to blame mine for my current line of work doing Shakespeare comics. Because they started taking me to the theater when I was like 3 years old. And Shakespeare, not too long after that, I was probably like 8 or 9 when I first saw Shakespeare. We would just go and see theater every summer, like it was just the normal thing that all families did, was have theater festival trips in the summer.
And not just any Shakespeare either. Stratford Shakespeare.
Yeah, at the Stratford Festival up in Ontario, Canada, which is the closest big Shakespeare festival to us. And yeah, so I just grew up watching all sorts of things on stage and Shakespeare in particular. And I really got into it. And my dad, because I showed interest in it, my dad would show me movies of Shakespeare, including the Olivier Henry V, which for some reason really captured my imagination, probably because it's so bright and colorful and has people running around hitting each other with swords, as I always say. So I started just thinking it was a really fun thing. And as I grew up and it sort of had to do Shakespeare in school with everybody else, I realized that a lot of people did not think Shakespeare was a really fun thing. And so eventually about, 2013, almost 10 years, 9 years ago, I started drawing comics about shows that I had seen just to share with friends on Facebook. And eventually one of them was like, you should just put these up on your own website and maybe not spam our Facebook feed with them. So that's what I did. And I've been doing it ever since, to my amazement.
And can you explain how you landed on the name GoodTickleBrain?
Yeah, well, when I got a website, I was like, well, I got to call it something. So I started sort of brainstorming fun quotes from Shakespeare that sort of had this mixture of sort of irreverence and geekiness. And one of the first things I wrote down was GoodTickleBrain, which is this line from Henry IV, Part 1, Act 2, Scene 4, I think, which is the whole play acting scene in the Boar's Head Tavern with Falstaff pretending to be Hal's father. And one of the things he says to Mistress Quickly, who keeps interrupting, is "Peace, GoodTickleBrain." And I love the sound of GoodTickleBrain. It was like this wonderful, it turned out TickleBrain was like a slang for alcohol. So really he was saying, shut up, you drunkard. But But I liked the tickle, the good and tickle sort of like fun stuff, and then combined with the brain, it just meshed nicely. So I just went with that. And
Well, and speaking of alcohol, good tickle brain has good mouth feel, as we
yeah,
say.
I think so. Thank you. Yeah, I think so.
Um, that's outstanding. And I know, and it's not only these comic strips, but you have merchandise. I am wearing one of your classic shirts right now,
Beautiful.
that could be purchased from your website, goodticklebrain.com. Um, how has your, I know that over the years, a lot of your stuff has been featured well, the your books have been in the Stratford Festival Bookshop. Didn't they used some of your artwork as signage at the Shakespeare Birthplace Trust in Stratford, England, upon Avon? Notre Dame Shakespeare commissioned you.
Yeah, it was very sort of surreal when I started out, because I was really just doing this for my own amusement, and I think it was the Birthplace Trust that first got in touch with me, being like, "Hey, could you draw some comics for some of our educational materials that we make available to school groups visiting there?" And I was like, "Okay, yeah, sure. I don't know what I'm doing." So I ended up drawing like stick figure Waddle and Daub and like stick
Nice.
figure leather working and just random things that they use. And so yeah, that was like the first inkling that I got that these were more than just sort of like entertainment for myself, but they were something that other people were using as tools, as education and outreach tools, and that was pretty exciting. And then I started getting emails from teachers saying, "Oh, I'm using your comics in my classroom with students, and they're really loving it." And that was also really cool, but also it made me think, oh, I got to take this a little bit more seriously. If students are, if this is sort of like the entryway for students into Shakespeare, I don't want to screw things up too much. So
Well, and I think that probably in the same way that when we do the complete works or any of our shows, we're hopefully we're not intimidating because audiences go, boy, if these idiots could do Shakespeare. I mean, same with you. If she can draw comics, then anybody can draw a comic.
yeah, and I mean that's something I've been really excited about recently, is because I've had many people ask me, "Oh, why did you choose to do stick figures? Is it like, are you making some sort of statement?" I'm like, "No, that's literally the only thing I could draw is stick figures. Like you are seeing the pinnacle of my artistic achievement on the page." Um, but the nice thing is that stick figures are not intimidating, and people can draw their own stick figures. So recently, I've been put together this sort of curriculum for teachers to use with their students to get students to draw their own Shakespeare comics. And the couple times I've run this as a workshop, it's been really fun to see what people come up with. And it's like you give them the tools to explore Shakespeare in a different way than just reading or on the stage, and they become their own sort of directors and take real ownership of the storytelling on the page. So that's been something that I've had a lot of fun with.
Yeah, taking ownership is a really important idea, I think. Making it your own. It's not this thing that it has been assigned to me. I get this and I can own it. Um, yeah, I think that's a really great point. And I remember you posted one cartoon for that some teacher sent you from some kid, and you said, "This is amazing. This kid's going to put me out of business." I mean, you got to be impressed with some of what you see.
It's really cool because, again, like, I mean, kids' minds work on a different level than adults' minds, and it's
Yeah.
really fun to see what sort of things kids latch onto and then put a cool twist on them. And some of the stuff I see is like, oh wow, that's never in a million years would have thought of that. So it's really fun to see what kids are getting out of Shakespeare and then seeing how they are representing that in comic form. It's very entertaining.
So how has it been these last 18 months, 20 months now, trying to be funny during a pandemic to create comic skewed takes on things?
It's been terrible. I don't know. So it was interesting because I started this big project with my pocket dramaturg Kate Pitt in the fall of 2019. We started doing a stick figure Hamlet, a complete epic scene by scene retelling of Hamlet with stick figures. And that carried me through the first year of the pandemic because I had this project that I was working on. It had a concrete beginning and a concrete end. And every day I would wake up and think, okay, what's the next scene of Hamlet that I have to do? And then I'd sit down and do it. And so, like, that sort of kept me creating through the early part because I was already on a train moving forward. And then once I finished that in the fall of 2020, like the wheels kind of came off everything, and I was just like, well, what do I do now? And so it's been a rough, well, almost a year, half a year now, that I've just, yeah, not really been able to tap into that sort of like, ooh, creative energy that used to be there. Yeah, and so it's been rough, and I've been trying to sort of find things to do. So I drew a lot of comics about my own experiences in the pandemic, and I drew a lot of comics about my artistic struggling in the pandemic. So like trying to do different things, but I'm really itching to get back to the meat and potatoes of Shakespeare comics. So I'm hopeful my brain will start to cooperate again.
Well, and you showed me earlier that you are wearing a Truth in Advertising shirt.
Yeah, got my moody and insecure artist shirt on today.
Hi, I'd like to talk. Oh, okay. No, sorry. Back away from the moody, insecure artist. I wrote a piece. So I write these monthly articles for the Folger Shakespeare Library, which is a wonderful challenge and a privilege, actually. And one of the things that my wife Dee Ryan and I did over the pandemic is to watch a lot of Shakespeare. We watched a lot of Shakespeare productions, including King Lear, for reasons that I'll get to in this conversation. And no matter what play we were watching, Dee would say, "Oh, this is Shakespeare's plague play. Oh, this is his plague play." You know, they all say, "Oh, Shakespeare never wrote a play about the plague, except for that one plot point in Romeo and Juliet and his very 107, I think, uses of the word plague in the canon. He never wrote a play about the plague." But as we kept watching different productions of Shakespeare, and this is what I wrote for the Folger, come to realize when Shakespeare was writing his plays, it wasn't like a plague every 5 or 6 years. It was like a plague every 2 or 3 years that lasted for 2 or 3 years. So for Shakespeare's entire professional career, he was either writing a play during a plague, in the wake of a previous plague, or in nervous anticipation of the next plague. So we have begun, Dee and I have begun to recognize themes of despair, confusion, dread, plays filled with characters forced to, as we would say now, pivot, you know, by dressing as a man and running into the forest, or usurping a rebel, being a rebel, or fighting off rebels to the king. The point of which is to say, I think the good news is you're not alone. Shakespeare was doing this too, you know. Does that strike any chords with you? Does that cheer you up in any way?
No, because he kept having new plagues coming back. Yeah. I can't, like, if we're gonna have another set of these pandemic in another couple of years, I'm gonna go out of my mind. But
he wrote 2 or 3 plays a year. He kept writing, I guess.
Yeah. I remember when the pandemic started, everyone was going on about, oh, well, you know, in the lockdown, Shakespeare wrote King Lear. It's like, great, thanks. It's really making me feel good about my pandemic sourdough project or whatever. It's
not helping.
Yeah, but it's interesting because I think it's a natural impulse if you're an artist to use your art to comment on what's going on, and certainly the sort of more personal comics that I wrote about, you know, the angst of grocery shopping and early pandemic, and just like all the things you do when you're in lockdown to try and keep from going insane. Like those were definitely therapeutic for me, and also they came really easily because it's like I'm like writing about what's going on, what's happening now, and I'm putting that into my art form, such as it is. And so that I recognize that impulse perhaps in Shakespeare to take everything that he was dealing with and turning that into art.
Well, and as much as I love all your funny comics, the ones that have dealt with your angst have really resonated as well, and it seems anecdotally that they've resonated with much of your audience.
It's really interesting because I follow several other webcomics on Instagram and stuff, and so many of them over the last couple of years started posting these comics of like being creatively stuck, being uninspired, being unable to come up with the work that you're trying to do. And it is like this huge theme going through the webcomic community, with everybody just expressing this feeling of stuckness and like, I can't get anything done. I'm trying to create, nothing's. So of course, everyone is creating about not being able to create. And that seemed to be a theme. And I definitely resonated with me, certainly. And I've drawn my fair share of those comics too.
Well, that's interesting. So you were drawn to content created by other artists, visual artists, dealing with the same issues you're dealing. I was drawn to content dealing with surviving apocalypses. I did deep dives into apocalyptic fiction, starting with literally March 14th of 2020. It was the Saturday after March 13th. I went, you know what? I'm going to watch Poseidon Adventure, goddammit. That was my first. And then we dove into so many different movies and television shows and novels about surviving pandemics, surviving apocalypse, because for me, that was therapeutic. The idea that examining the idea of what it means to survive, what it means to get through it, what it means to then flourish. That was very helpful to me. And I know a lot of people went, oh God, I can't possibly watch. I'm like, I can't watch the news. Watching the news, that's way too painful and harsh. I have to retreat into fiction.
Yeah. I mean, it seems to have worked for you since you've actually been quite productive this pandemic.
I've had to pivot, as they say, right? I mean, because this is the other thing too. For a playwright like Shakespeare, who didn't intend his plays to be read, he intended them to be performed. He's writing them and they can't be performed and seen. And that's enormously frustrating. A feeling I completely understand. So like we were just supposed to, like this last weekend and in 2 weekends, we were supposed to be doing our first performances back. And of course, now they've been postponed as well. And so what do I do? What do I do during the pandemic? I write 2 plays that may or may not ever be performed and produced. Who knows? But we'll talk about those in a bit. Did you watch or read Station 11?
I did pre-pandemic. I think it must have been 2019, actually, for the Shakespeare Theater Association conference that we both go to. They had this little book club going and they were like, read Station 11 before you come and we can all get together and talk about it. So I read it. I don't usually do post-apocalyptic fiction, but I read it because everyone was like, oh, there's a Shakespeare element in it. And I have this vivid memory of, I'm going to give slight Station 11 spoilers, but not much, of sitting in this room and we're all talking about it. And we're all going around the room talking about, oh, what did you like about this novel, which takes place during a pandemic. And they got to me and I was like, I really didn't like that one of the main characters is a comic book artist who self-publishes her own comic books and then dies of the plague. I was like, didn't appreciate that.
Wow.
Yeah. So I every time Station 11 has come up in conversation since the start of the pandemic, I'm like, this is not a good analogy for self-published comic book artists. This is not what I want to hear.
Wow. As much as I've thought about Station 11, I never made that connection. That's amazing. For anybody in the waiting room who doesn't know, Station 11 is a novel by Emily St. John Mandel about a virus that wipes out 99% of the world population, but it focuses on a surviving troupe of Shakespearean performers sort of circling the Midwest, giving performances and dealing with the various threats and shortages and blah, blah, blah. And the HBO Max has just done a 10-episode miniseries that is outstanding. It's really great. And it doubles down on so much of what we're talking about. And in fact, the character that you related to, Miranda, is even, not too spoiler, is even more heroic in her way. They double, triple, fourple down on the Shakespearean content and the Shakespearean analogies that are literally underlined in the book. They are performing the work of a guy who wrote plays in a pre-electronic age, and they're performing them now in a post-electronic age. And the miniseries is fantastic. If you can sucker into this thing. Dee, my wife in the chat, says, but the good news about the book is that artists live on into the future. And you know, for a guy who was surviving on Shakespeare and post-apocalyptic fiction, to have them come together in one thing was phenomenal.
Well, someday maybe when my nerves have settled down, I'll think about looking at the miniseries, but it's going to be a while.
Yeah, no, I feel that. Alicia Elliott, who's one of my Patreon supporters, and the artistic director, speaking of great names, Good Tickle Brain, the artistic director of the Rude Mechanicals Theater Company, which is outstanding, has just written in the chat, our local library did a city read with Station 11. That was the year the Rude Mechanicals did Hamlet. We had our traveling troupe of actors from Hamlet visit each of the library branches to read sections of Station 11 and to perform scenes from Hamlet. This was pre-pandemic when we were so naive. Now it just feels really meta. Wow, that's astonishing. Good for your library system, and good for you to bring you in. That's amazing. Well, yeah, so what did I do during the pandemic, Daddy? So yeah, I was productive in the sense that I couldn't do anything else. I couldn't act. I mean, I did some acting, you know, the show must go online, and a few readings for friends and whatnot. And I created the Shakespeareance. Maybe that was my biggest pivot, was doing this, which I've really enjoyed and hope to stick with it slightly better in 2022. But I did write 2 plays, one of which, well, actually both of which I had been thinking about and discussing for a while. And the first play that I wrote is a 6-actor, 19-character farce that is very loosely based on my family's history, that my branch of my family tree going back to the 1600s. And it's I'm calling it, I'm describing it accurately, I've been told, as The Crucible meets Noises Off, because it's a bunch of different members from different generations of a family, all occupying the same physical space of this house that has survived for 400 years. So it's people coming and going and commenting on each other and you find out various mysteries, etc. It's called Puritans, and I am due to do a major rewrite. We had a reading of it in last fall and got a lot of good notes. I talked to a director that I would love to work with. She had some excellent notes on things to focus on, maybe things to peel away. So I'm looking forward to diving back into the next rewrite of that. But then the biggest, most immediate play that I wrote, and this is why I was watching King Lear so much, is that, you know, if Shakespeare wrote King Lear during a plague, I wrote my own version of King Lear, which in that we had been talking about doing this for a long time, but Christopher Moore, the New York Times bestselling novelist, has written a book called Fool, which is the story of King Lear, but from the fool's point of view. And there was nothing else to do during this pandemic, so he gave me his permission and blessing to write a stage adaptation of that. So that's been really super fun. Again, we had a reading of that last fall, did a rewrite of that, and I have now started sending it out to theaters to see if anybody's interested in producing this thing, because I mean, I can do as many rewrites as I want. Anybody watching this knows that if you're a playwright, it's not done until you get it up on its feet with actors and designers and in front of audiences. And even then, you will begin to learn more. So I'm hoping that will happen. You know, next time the theaters are producing again. The problem is that so many theaters, their seasons are backlogged because they've had to cancel a season and a half or 2 seasons worth of material. And I know that they're going to be lining those up to do those either this spring or this fall. So it'll be a while before they get to truly new productions of things that they haven't already been thinking about for 2 or 3 years. But these plays have been hugely exciting to work on, and I really hope I get to do Fool somewhere, because I don't think I ever need to do a Lear, but I would love to do Fool somewhere because it kind of tells the truth. It's a Fool. If you haven't read it, I really recommend it. It is excellent backstory to the characters in Lear, and maybe gives some of the characters more of the fates they deserve than Shakespeare did. Have you read Fool? Yeah.
I read Fool. I haven't read the two other ones that he's written with the same characters, but I read Fool for sure.
Yeah, he has carried on. It's become a trilogy now. So Fool was the first book. He then and the name of he named the Fool Pocket. He was raised in the Abbey at dog snogging, so he is Pocket of dog snogging. And he spoiler, he survives the events of King Lear in the novel Fool and goes to Venice in a novel called The Serpent of Venice, and then where he meets up with characters from both Othello and The Merchant of Venice. And he, spoiler alert, he survives that to go into to go to Athens and a forest just outside Athens in a novel called Shakespeare for Squirrels. And if you are looking for random, wild, irreverent Shakespeare adjacent content, I can think of nothing. I mean, aside from the work of Mya Gosling and myself, if you like it in the handy, very popular novel form, Christopher Moore's pocket of dog snogging novels are really terrific. That was not a question. That was a long, that was a long hold forth.
No, but you made me think of something. Going back to our supposed topic of creating in a pandemic, is the pivot thing that everybody is talking about, and how you had to pivot from performing to writing. And I'm realizing I never pivoted because my work is self-contained. I can do it at home, and it just goes up on online. And so I was never forced to pivot and to sort of like stop and think, okay, how can I do my work in a different sort of setting? So I just like felt like I had to keep going on in the same way that I had been going. And I'm wondering now if that is like partially why I got so burnt out during the pandemic, is I didn't pivot. And I didn't have any sort of impetus to pivot. And I just had to keep go business as usual until it isn't. But yeah, that just suddenly occurred to me.
Well, I think you have pivoted in a way. I'm just not sure you've embraced it. I mean, those cartoons that you've drawn about your own angst dealing with cartoons and having to get back to being funny, I think I mean, my sense is whatever we do is what we do. There is no, but I'm supposed to be doing this. But if your impulse is to do that, then that's what you do. And I say you, but I mean we, all of us, you know? And I know, and we can cut this out if you don't want me to make this public, Mya, later in the edited for public version. But I know one thing that you've been doing during this pandemic is writing parody Beatles lyrics with Shakespeare characters, and it's my podcast, so I can swear, fucking amazing. What are you doing with those? What do you plan to do with those? Because they're astonishing. Your gift for parody is admirable and enviable.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that might be my pandemic project. And I mean, I started doing that because I think it was December of 2020, I bought a ukulele for the first time, and had to learn how to play it, and then had to find some relatively easy songs to learn how to play on the ukulele. And my friend recommended I do some Beatles songs. So I started learning Beatles songs and being like, well, if I'm playing them, I can just sort of like rewrite them to be a little bit more Shakespearean. And it's been super fun. And I've been posting those to my top tier Patreon supporters, but I'm also collecting them. And my dream is to put together a little printed comic book of Shakespeare ukulele tunes for beginners. So anyone who picks up a ukulele within a couple weeks can play a whole bunch of fun Beatles and other rock and pop parody songs with a Shakespearean twist. So those are, yeah, they've been fun.
They're amazing. I can't. I should have researched this more, but it just literally occurred to me. But I remember one title is Athenian Wood, to the tune of Norwegian Wood.
I've got my very fancy ukulele songbook here.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, I mean, probably my favorite is Gertrude to the tune of Hey Jude. That one, you sent me a video of you singing that one, and that worked out very well, I think. But yeah, so I've got a whole bunch of them, mostly the Beatles, because those are the songs I was learning. But I've got some other ones too, and that maybe that was part of my pandemic pivot is learning a new skill and then learning how to take my weird Shakespearean angle and applying it to the new skill. But those have been very satisfying.
Just in preparation for this call, I stumbled on some random ideas that I shared with you that I don't think you've taken me up on yet. Everybody's got something to hide except for me and my donkey, sung by Titania, and Got to Make You Into My Wife, sung by Petrucci.
See, the Got to Make You Into My Wife one, which I know you started to write, I wanted to do Got to Get You Onto My Knife with the conspirators singing that.
Oh.
Instead, I ended up writing Ben King's Stab by Me, as sung by Cassius.
Stab by Me.
Stab by Me. Yeah, stab now, stab by me. Yeah. So I've got the conspirator song, but yeah, got to get you got to make you into my wife.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that one's got legs. We can work on that one.
We'll workshop that.
Yeah.
This book is going to fly off the shelves, Mya. I mean, it's every Shakespeare theater in the world is going to have that book, that songbook in its. But see, this is the trick. It's not just the pivot of drawing art about something else. It's the business of that. Well, yeah, but now I got to publish this thing. Now I got to produce it and get it out there. And you're a one-man band.
Yep. Yeah. So I mean, it's really hard because people are always giving me cool ideas. Oh, you should do this kind of merch or do this kind of thing. I'm like, yeah, but then I'd have to do it.
Right.
So like people, you should make mugs. It's like, great. Then I'd have to design the mug and find a place to print the mug and get the mug shipped to me and then find a place to store the mugs. And then what do I do with the mugs that don't sell? And it's just like a huge headache. And I mean, they have print on demand services and stuff like that. But even that, you're going through and be like, which one has the best percentage? Which one has the best print quality? And it's just a lot of bureaucracy. And it's like during the pandemic, it's like, yes, I have the time for that, but I also I don't have the mental space to create. How am I going to find the mental space to do the bureaucracy part, which is the part that I really don't like?
Yeah,
so it's the
mental bandwidth. You know, it's we're coming up on about 23-ish minutes, 25 minutes left in our conversation. So I do want to remind everybody that this is your opportunity to put a question in the chat and then we'll get to it. My first question, and I already know the answer to it, but is how do we actually pronounce your name, Mya?
It's a Burmese name. So I always say it's Mya as in Myanmar, but then it turns out lots of people say Myanmar, which is incorrect. So it's Mya. It's, if you want to get technical, it's the Burmese creaky high tone, Mya. I like to say it's meow without the ow, or saying Mya, Mya.
Oh, it's like chef's kiss, Mya.
Yes. That's another. I should do that one too. Mya. Yeah. So it's I gone through my entire life with various permutations of it, Mya and Maya being the most common ones, and I'm pretty much fine with it, but I am also proud of the fact that it's a Burmese name, and it's really funny because the only people who really pronounce it correctly are my immediate family and the Burmese family that gave me the name, and other Burmese people. So it's kind of like
shout out to the Burmese people. Before I realized it was chef's kiss, I used to go, oh, it's like my impression of Edward G. Robinson. Yeah, see?
Yeah,
right?
Exactly. And it's interesting because we have that sound combination in the English language, but when you present it to people as a name, they get really confused. But everyone can say it, but they can't put it together in their brain as a name. So
yeah, no, I get that. Well, that's good. Well, we settled that now. That's astonishing. Well done, everybody. Does anybody have any questions? Would like to ask Mya anything? Ask me anything about my plays? Mya, do you have any questions for me?
Oh gosh. Well, I mean, like, what did, when you said that you were watching all of Shakespeare's plays and deciding they all had plague themes, like, give me another example besides King Lear.
Wait, besides King Lear?
You want to talk about King Lear?
Now you're going to make me go to my essay. I mean, anybody who's ever had to escape the city to go into the forest, which people in Shakespeare's time literally did to escape the plague if they could. But the forest wasn't always welcoming. In fact, there were people on the road to stop you from coming into their town because you might have been in London or come in contact with somebody who had been in London. But I'm thinking of any character that just, Mr. and Mrs. Macbeth, anybody who's felt any sort of dread at all about anything. I mean, Alicia, sorry, and I'll ask you too, Alicia or Alicia? E or I? Alicia says, when I taught high school.
It's Alicia. Sorry, it's Alicia.
Alicia, thank you.
Yeah.
Names are important. It's good to pronounce them right.
Alicia is, people say, how do you say your last name, Mr.? And I always go, how do you think it's pronounced? And more often than not, they say Tichenor. And I'm going, a CH makes a K sound? A CH makes a ch sound. What are we doing? But that's fine. It's fun to know. Alicia. Anyway, Alicia says, when I taught high school English and theater, I always show the complete works R&J scene, which I am famously not in. After I traumatized the students with the 1997 film, traumatized, really. And I constantly shared Mya's comics and the students loved them. There you go. Thanks, Alicia. Now I use both in our pre-show talks before performances with folks of all ages. So thank you, Alicia says. And she says, I am in it. I'm the narrator. Yeah, the narrator.
You're the balcony.
I'm literally the balcony. Dee mentions tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow. Yeah, it's always, which is great. It's not always the sun will come out tomorrow. It's like, it's the Beatles song. Tomorrow never comes. No, that's tomorrow never knows. Shoot.
I mean, it is, the pandemic has been creeping along in its petty pace. So I definitely resonate with that.
Yeah, from month to month, from year to year.
Yeah. The last syllable of recorded time.
Yeah. Well, and that's the thing too. I mean, except for the pandemic of 1918, I'm sure these themes in Shakespeare have sort of gone unrecognized as plague related because we haven't had any reason to be aware of it. I
think everybody thinks of the plague as like the Monty Python "Bring Out Your Dead" scene,
right?
And I don't think prior to this, I don't think any of us lived through the staying at home, things being closed, not being able to go out, the sort of angst of just like walking down the street and like, am I going to get it today? I think those like day-to-day realities of the plague didn't really come home to us until we had to live through it.
Another question for you, Mya. If Shakespeare wasn't a solace to you during the pandemic, did you rely on any of your other nerd passions? Star Trek, Gilbert and Sullivan.
Yeah, it's really interesting because everybody started doing streaming. Like they were streaming film productions, they were streaming stage productions, doing Zoom readings of Shakespeare, and I just couldn't deal with any of it. And in fact, I was just thinking as we got on this call that I haven't actually seen or even heard a full production of Shakespeare since the pandemic started. So yeah, for some reason my brain was like, I don't want to deal with that. I can't.
Because it feels like work.
Yeah, it probably is a large part of that. Work without the joy of live theater, because I think the live theater aspect of it was a big part of what made me excited about this, and I just haven't had that. So yeah, I went to things that were like comfort viewing. So Star Trek, like every lunch, I'll sit down and watch a Star Trek episode. I'm going very methodically through it in order of air date. So that's been sort of my comfort viewing for sure.
I think my son has been doing that too. He can confirm or deny in the chat.
I'm in the DS9 Voyager era right now, so I'm working through those. But I also, the Muppet Show, now that it's all on Disney Plus, I've been going back and rewatching that, and like that's a really formative influence for me, because I grew up, as a baby, my parents would plunk me down and show me that. So blame the Muppet Show for giving me a warped sense of humor and an interest in backstage theater hijinks. So those two things have definitely been comforting to me.
Well, and shout out to your parents. I mean, yes, we can blame them, but we must give them the credit as well.
Yeah, they raised me right. They raised me on a good diet of culture. Muppet Show, Gilbert and Sullivan, Shakespeare. It was good times.
Well, and the other thing I know that you do is that you are a climber, not a social climber, an actual climber.
Yeah, rock climber. That's my physical hobby. That keeps that's definitely been a solace. Once the gyms reopened, there was like I didn't go climbing for a month or a year until I got vaccinated, and that was really hard because climbing is something that I find mentally rejuvenating too. Because when you're climbing up a steep wall holding on by your fingertips, it's very hard to think about anything else. So it's like a very nice, you're forced to be in the moment and just experiencing what it's like. So since the gyms reopened and I got vaccinated and I've been climbing, that's been very helpful.
Well, and it's also good for your cartooning fingers, I would imagine.
I don't know. Like I have some problems. I can't fully contract that finger anymore. It's kind of just stuck. So
from the cartooning or the climbing?
Oh, the climbing for sure. So as someone whose business is in their fingers, I really oughtn't to be climbing, but I don't care.
But I can attest, because Mya and I just saw each other at the beginning of the month for the first time in IRL, as the kids say, at the Shakespeare Theater Association conference. And I can confirm that the climbing has given her some guns, because her hugs are fierce and pressurized. My God.
Well, it was like 2 years worth of hugs in a single hug. So
that's true. I was like that little doll that you squeeze in the eyeballs, go, Ahooga!
You are exaggerating, sir.
Me? Moi? I never, ever exaggerate. This is not a question. It's a comment that young Quincy Tichenor, my son, said. I'm still in TNG, the next generation. But then he says, TOS, the original series supremacy, though. Thoughts, Mya?
It's really hard because I've been going through and trying to figure out like, what's my favorite series? Not that you have to have one, but like, a lot of it is what you start with. And I started watching in sort of like fourth season DS9. Oh. And so I like really imprinted on DS9, and it's like completely different from TOS and TNG and like your stationary. But the thing I like about it is you do develop a secondary cast of characters that has a lot more sort of permanence, and interpersonal relationships are come to the fore a lot more. So I'm not going to say it's my favorite, but it's really close to my heart. And I mean, I feel like TOS is a completely different beast. Like it's wacky and unregulated and no care for continuity and just like super fun and goofy.
Right. They're literally writing the history of the Federation as they go.
Yeah. So that one hits differently for me, but I enjoy it too.
That's true for people who see reduced Shakespeare Company shows as well. Whichever show they see first is the one they imprint on, and that becomes their favorite.
I think that's the case for a lot of things. You know, your first exposure to something is what you latch on to normally. And I mean, you know, everybody has this thing with music, or like the music of your youth is what you really glom onto it, and that becomes sort of your part of your identity. So wait, Quincy said, trying to take issue with what Quincy just posted there.
I was just going to do that too. The motion picture, the first movie is also the best movie. Wow.
He's just stirring trouble there. That's trolling. That's top level trolling. I'm not going to engage with that.
Well, but then he asks an intelligent question. At the start of the pandemic, folks are thinking it's odd Shakespeare never wrote that explicitly about the plague, but now different artists, TV shows, etc., struggle with whether or not to mention the pandemic. Succession didn't mention it, but This Is Us did. How do you guys feel art should or will deal with the pandemic now? That is a really interesting question.
That is a good question. Like, part of me doesn't want to turn on a sitcom and be like, oh, everyone's wearing masks and socially distancing and talking about their vaccination status. Like, unless the show is specifically about the pandemic. Like, I don't, like part of me doesn't want to see like the everyday sort of pandemic things just dropped into a show that's not necessarily about that. But on the other hand, it is like a hugely important cultural moment, and it's interesting to see who is choosing to reflect that in their art or not. Because like, yeah, I don't really want to see the pandemic on screen. I'm living it. Like maybe 10 years from now.
I think you're right. The season 2 of the morning show on Apple TV did deal with the pandemic almost embarrassingly. I mean, it was just sort of in real time and it was not well done. I feel it feels a little bit like the pandemic will be like children on sitcoms. You say that there are kids there, but you never see them, you never deal with them, because who wants to deal with kids on a sitcom if it's not about that? And who wants to deal with the plague if it's not going to be really about that? I know that when we get back to live performing, we're absolutely going to make jokes about it, because how can we not? You know, particularly in theater, how can we pretend that it never happened? Because theater is all about being present.
And like, that's a good point, is I would be much more interested in like a comedic take on the pandemic, something that can make us laugh at it and just like recognize the absurdities that we've been going through in the last couple of years. Like, I'd be much more open to that than like a drama that's set in the pandemic. I don't want that.
I wish I could tell you all what the next Reduced Shakespeare Company show is going to be, but I haven't cleared it with Reed yet, and so I'm not going to. But it's an idea that we came up with before the pandemic, and weirdly, good news, bad news, it's going to fit perfectly well with pandemic-related content. D. Ryan says the salt episode in Star Trek is a plague. Interesting. Yeah, it's not a serial killer, maybe, the salt vampire? Interesting. Plague, no, vampires are plagues. Sure, that makes sense.
It's interesting. The one episode I've skipped in my epic rewatching is a DS9 episode where they go to a planet where everyone has been infected with a genetically modified virus and it kills them all. And I was like, nope, I'm skipping this one. Good, next.
Yeah, thank you for telling me about that one, because that's the thing I'm going to watch as soon as we're done. Get right into it. I worked with Q, you know. Did you?
That's right. You mentioned that. And I was stunned. Tell me.
Well, I don't want to, I will tell you, but I don't want to put off anybody else who feels like they have questions that they want answered. But until we get more questions, I will tell you that, when we were living in LA, I got a phone call from my agent, and she asked, do you know John DeLancie? And I went, yeah, the actor who plays Q. Yeah, I know. Sure. I don't know him, but I know him. And we had he was also her client, and he was directing, he was doing a series of concerts with the Los Angeles Philharmonic at Disney Hall, and it was called First Nights, and where they would perform great symphonic pieces, but do a little theater aspect of it, add a theater aspect to what the premiere of these symphonic pieces were like. And he was doing one, I think it was the first one, about the Rite of Spring, Stravinsky's Rite of Spring, which famously there was a riot about, and I forget the reasons why there was a riot, but anyway, they needed somebody to play the conductor, and I don't know whether somebody fell out or he called his agent, said he couldn't find anybody. Anyway, she thought of me, bless her. And so I had to audition for him, but time was a factor, and he was getting his car fixed. So I had to go meet him. I had to go meet him at the garage where his car was being fixed in LA somewhere. I want to say it was on Wilshire, but I can't remember. Olympic maybe. And so we got there, and we both sat in the front seat of my car because his car was getting fixed. And he said, "What have you done? What do you do?" And I went, "This and this and this." And he said, "Do you do a French accent?" I went, I do a comic operetta French accent. He said, "Let me hear it." So I gave him a little bit of a French accent, you see. And he went, "Yeah, that's fine. Good, fine." So I played the French conductor, the original conductor of Stravinsky's Rite of Spring. I forget his name. But Stravinsky was a character. Diaghilev was a character. It was a fantastic thing. And because I was the conductor, I was playing the conductor, I was on stage with the Los Angeles Philharmonic Orchestra in brand new Disney Hall, which had only opened the week before. And I thought, I'm going to get to conduct the Los Angeles Philharmonic. And I had done a little conducting in high school because I had done some substitute teaching for my old music teacher, and I had stage managed the Oakland Symphony, so I was not unfamiliar with the ways and the techniques. But the union rules prohibited any chimp off the street like me to wave a baton at the Los Angeles Philharmonic. So I handed the baton to my assistant, played by Esa-Pekka Salonen, the actual conductor, and I was sitting on a stool right here watching him conduct the LA Philharmonic on the stage of Disney Hall, and it was one of the best gigs I've ever had.
That's
and
amazing.
Yeah, does John DeLancie remember me? I don't think he does, but it was enormous fun.
That's one of the most random auditions I've ever heard of.
Everybody thinks it's so glamorous. I auditioned for Q in the front seat of my car, and that sounds creepy if you just say it like that. And Q is going to be in the new Star Trek Picard, second season of Star Trek Picard.
Yes, I'm not there yet. I'm still working through Voyager and Deep Space Nine.
What the hell have you been doing? It's been a pandemic. Yeah,
I know. I don't do the binge watching thing. I can't watch more than one episode a day. Otherwise, I start to feel like a slug. So.
But again, I would argue this is your job. You are a contributor to and a commentator on popular culture.
But not Star Trek. I do Shakespeare.
You say you do Shakespeare. How much Shakespeare have you done?
None.
You do Beatles lyrics.
Yeah,
I think whatever you do is what you do. And I think the Good Tickle brand is so strong and so inclusive. It can hold multitudes. It can contain the multitudes of what Mya Gosling wants to draw cartoons about. And anybody think I'm wrong in the chat? Let me know. No, I'm right, aren't I?
Well, thank you. I am.
Well, I'm a big fan, as you know. Alicia Elliott, right, 100%. Yes. If you are interested in finding out more about Mya's work, go to her website, GoodTickleBrain.com, and even more, if you can, if you're interested, become one of her Patreon supporters. I am. It's great to. I don't get to see you, but I can buy you a cup of coffee. A kind of a venti, I think, at my level of contribution. I think I'm buying you a venti.
Yeah, you're buying me big old coffee. It's
with a shot. I think with a shot of something.
Bailey's probably, yeah.
Yeah.
No, you're yeah. It's really, I do like, not to plug Patreon, but I do like the ability to support, because I support you on Patreon too. Not buying you quite as big a cup of coffee, but it's really nice to be able to support artists whose work you enjoy. And that's one of the things I've enjoyed recently.
And I shared the same angst as you about feeling like we're letting our Patreon supporters down by not providing enough content during this time. And I know that I lost one Patreon supporter who joined me yesterday because I was starting the conversations back up again, and that's totally fine. I get that.
Yeah, but I think it is important to remember that when you're supporting someone on Patreon, you're really supporting their work. And if they're not always producing stuff, but are still sort of working and doing the thing, I'm fine with supporting people who aren't posting constantly. Like, it's nice to get the regular content and perks that are promised, but you're supporting more than that. You're like supporting the person and trying to keep them up. And it's really nice because I've posted lots of apologetic messages to my Patreon supporters being like, I'm sorry, I haven't got any new comics out. And almost all of them were like, it's fine. We like you. We want you to be happy. And like, yeah, it's fine, which is so honestly heartwarming and encouraging. So thank you.
It should be. I have Patreon supporter envy. You have a good number of folks supporting you, and that's fantastic, as you should. Unless anybody has any more questions, we can end the conversation. It's been so, I will give you a couple of seconds if you want. Mya, it's been so great getting to talk to you in front of people and for people, because I always, it's the best. That's why I started the RC podcast. It's why I started the Shakespeareans. I get to talk to a lot of really interesting folks, and I love sharing that conversation. Also bringing more people into that conversation. Quincy has a question from Mya. Best comic books, graphic novels, inspiration?
Oh, this is hard because I don't read a lot of comic books or graphic novels. It's honestly the classics: Peanuts, Calvin and Hobbes, that kind of stuff. Far Side, the classic sort of newspaper comic strip humor stuff that was a major formative influence on me and still is. And certainly, I really appreciate the more perhaps graphically evolved comic books and graphic novels, and like the storytelling that you can get with a long form graphic novel can be really impactful. But as far as my work goes, it's definitely the newspaper one-off comics.
Nice. I know Quincy would love your suggestion of what's your favorite Star Trek novel?
Are you sure? My favorite Star Trek novel is How Much for Just the Planet by John M. Ford, and it's an original series novel, and it's a complete genre mashup of Star Trek, silent movies, sort of noir, Hitchcockian thrillers, musical theater, and like Buster Keaton comedy. It's just like all of that smushed into a Star Trek novel. There's like songs, and it's completely bizarre, and it makes me laugh like every single time I read it. And I've read it twice during the pandemic already. How Much for Just the Planet, John M. Ford. It's bonkers.
That's a great suggestion. And I will throw in not Star Trek, but Sherlock Holmes pastiche, the West End horror, where Holmes and Watson meet many denizens of the London theater world in the late 19th century, including George Bernard Shaw, Bram Stoker, who went on to write Dracula, and of course, Gilbert and Sullivan. Also a great fun read. You guys, thank you so much for joining us on this new Shakespeareance of 2022. And Mya, thank you for coming on and talking with me.
Thanks. Always fun to talk to you.
Bye, you guys. Thank you so much. Thank you all for joining us.